What is happening, superfans? You're listening to Behind the Mask, the show where we chat with your favorite superhero fiction authors about the worlds and heroes they are writing. Behind the Mask is brought to you in conjunction with the amazing folks over at superherofiction.com. I'm your host, Franklin Kendrick, and today on the show, I am pleased to be talking with author Michael Bailey. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. So, I will start off with the hardest question,
Okay.
which is when you are not a superhero author behind the keyboard, who are you? What is your secret real world identity like?
It's honestly not that different. I've been a professional writer for about 22 years, the first 15 years of which I was first and foremost a reporter for my hometown newspaper and um, spent a lot of that covering politics. And after a while, that just completely does your head in, and the industry was kind of dying anyway. So it was a good time to transition to more or less full-time authorship slash freelancer. So I'm still primarily a writer, uh, but when I'm not doing that, I'm helping my wife out with her little side business, Storied Threads, quick plug, uh, embroidered goods. And normally around this time, I would be part of the creative staff for the Connecticut Renaissance Fair as its fight director. But for obvious reasons, the show is taking a pass on 2020. So little
Uh,
little extra writing time for me. My creative energies aren't being sucked away in a million different directions.
yes. Oh boy. It's it's like, there's like a you lose one thing, you gain sort of another unexpected thing this year so far.
Yeah, well, it seems like there's been a lot more lost than gained. So I'm
Uh,
what I've still got, I'm clinging on to like grim death.
mm. So let me ask you, what
All right.
you said that well you've written for a long time. What got you into writing fiction, and what steered you towards trying out writing superhero fiction?
Well, I've always been a storyteller of some sort. I actually started off uh, as a child as an aspiring cartoonist or comic book artist. I grew up on superhero comics. I actually learned to read through Spider-Man comics, aided
Nice.
and abetted by Sesame Street, the Electric Company, Zoom, all kinds of public television. And I've been in love with the art form and superheroes in particular since the beginning of my life. Jump forward to late teenage years when I enrolled in the Joe Kubert School.
Oh,
Again,
okay.
thinking I was going to become a comic book artist. I got there and quickly learned that I really did not have that kind of talent. I was surrounded by a lot of vastly superior artists. And I may have improved a little during my time at the Kubert School, but I plateaued pretty quickly and just couldn't go that extra mile. And I actually got to have a very serious and blunt talk with Joe Kubert himself, who at the time was very active in running the school. He was one of the teachers. Having a golden age great or silver age great right there was pretty fantastic. And Joe did me maybe the greatest favor anyone has ever done me and told me flat out that unless some miracle occurred, I was not going to cut it as a professional comic book artist, which after a lifetime of having that dream, it, it oddly was not disappointing. It was actually rather freeing. And the thing that really helped was that Joe said that I clearly had a storyteller's heart, a storyteller's instincts. It just wasn't visual art that was my media. So he suggested trying out writing. And growing up, I'd written my own comic strips, drew my own comic books constantly. So that was that was always there. So then I I quit the school and slaved away in retail for many years and taught myself to write as best I could. Going back to school just wasn't really an option for financial reasons, so I had to do it on my own. Um, Things kind of shook loose in 1998 when I got my first writing job as a reporter for my hometown newspaper, and just kind of built on that. And all the while, I was submitting novels, screenplays, whatever came to mind. I got rejected a lot, and rightfully so, because at the time I was terrible. Uh, I still have my first ever rejection letter from DC Comics. It's framed on
Oh my
my
gosh.
wall. Uh, nice. It was one of Karen Berger's assistant editors who gave me a polite thank you, but no thank you. Um, but as the saying goes, every writer has 10,000 bad pages in them. The more you write, the sooner you get those bad pages out of you. And eventually, I hit a point where I got the bad pages out of me.
Mhm.
As for writing superhero novels, the my series Action Figures came together from a bunch of different ideas that I had and rejected and reformulated since high school, and they just kind of fell together in this format. And I tried it out as a movie script, as a TV script. Tried it out as a novel a few times, and it never really clicked until I gave a shot at writing it as from first person perspective, from the main character's perspective.
Mhm.
That's when everything fell into place. And I know I've been rambling, and it's past the point of long story
That's
short,
fine. I like it.
um,
I love details.
but I got
Everyone's journey is totally different. So it's like, oh my gosh, what? How did you get? We all sort of like arrive at the same sort of place, but it's like our journeys to get here are like to write in the genre are like so vast. It's like different for everybody.
yeah, it's it to call it a long and winding road, I think, is to understate it a bit. But I got the action fit this manuscript for the first Action Figures novel to a point where I felt confident submitting it, and I actually got an agent with one of the big agencies out in California interested enough to work with me on it. And we spent probably 8 or 9 months emailing back and forth. She'd give me notes, I'd implement them, send her the new draft. Things are going very smoothly. And I thought, finally, this is it. And then mid December, she emailed me and said she wouldn't be taking me on as a client, not because of the quality of writing, but because she felt there was no market for a superhero prose series,
Mhm.
especially in the young adult industry, because you probably know the young adult industry tends to have these trends where one fresh new title comes out and then everyone jumps on the bandwagon.
Oh yes.
At so at the time, the uh, Twilight cycle was still going strong, and we were just starting to see the beginning of the Hunger Games cycle.
Mhm.
So even though the Marvel Cinematic Universe was a big deal at the time, still it was that was still ramping up. It had no presence in fiction novels, and she didn't think anyone would be interested. Um, Several months later, after for the first time in years, not writing a single thing for several months. A friend of mine, Justin Aucoin, who's published a few historical fiction pieces under the name J.M. Aucoin, uh, pushed me to try self-publishing. He'd done it himself with some reasonable success, and he told me, give it a try, it can't hurt. And I figured Action Figures got far enough in the process to tell me that it was good enough to be published. It just
Mhm.
didn't allegedly did not have an audience.
Mhm.
So I took a shot at it, and fortunately, I had spoken to a few other small press and independent authors who told me, don't gauge my success by the first book. If it's a series or a trilogy, keep writing, keep putting them out, because every book you put out is going to feed the previous book. And I'm glad I listened to
Yes.
that advice, because after book 3, people who weren't friends started buying and leaving reviews and occasionally sending me emails asking me when the next book was coming out. So I think that's when I finally hit the point of, okay, I can make this work.
Yes. So do you do this? Do you do your writing full time, or do you do other things on the side?
Uh, while I call myself first and foremost a professional writer, I do have a bunch of different side gigs to keep money flowing in, which
Mhm.
I used to feel bad about. But then I was fortunate enough to attend a writer's coffee house hosted by James Moore and Christopher Golden, two fantasy and sci-fi authors who live in Haverhill, not too far from me. They host a series of coffee houses where writers of all experience levels can just come, hang out, network, and ask questions. They're very giving with their advice, very generous gentlemen.
Mhm.
And one of the first things that, I forget if it was Chris or James who said it, but I think it was James. He remarked that maybe 2 or 3% of all traditionally published authors are making their living off nothing but their novel sales. The vast majority are supporting themselves through regular day jobs and side hustles. And he pointed out that he himself worked full time at Starbucks because, in his words, he liked having health insurance. So that made me
Exactly.
feel better about not doing just the writing as my sole source of income.
Mhm.
Um, Fortunately, one of my side gigs is very, very relaxed, and it actually gives me a little more writing time. So
That's
sneak
awesome.
it in a lot.
It also takes like a burden off of the. I must produce. This thing must sell.
Yeah, it's the money is nice, and it is part of the total income stream. But knowing that I don't have to pay every single bill with my monthly royalties it keeps the pressure off. I've done deadline doom before. I've done writing for a weekly paycheck before. That stuff burns you out fast.
Oh yes, goodness. So let me turn the conversation over to your book series. Can you
Okay.
give me like the intro, like the tour of what is your series about, and maybe like a profile of your heroes if there's more than one.
Well, as I said, the series is action figures. It's uh, it's marketed as a young adult series, but most of my readers are adults with a healthy sense of immaturity, if I can
Mhm.
appreciate.
Yeah.
Uh, it's a team superhero team, so I tell people if they are fans of uh, Young Justice, Teen Titans, Champions, New Mutants, then this is in their wheelhouse.
Mhm.
Uh, I try and I try and keep the tone. It's been series has been getting beer as I go along, but I still try and keep a pretty good sense of humor about it. I don't. It's Superheroes are inherently kind of silly, and it's nice to just roll with that sometimes
Yeah.
and just embrace the inherent foolishness of the concept. I say that respectfully. I don't mock the genre at all because I do love it, but I also admit it can be a little absurd at times.
Yeah.
So the core of the series is five friends who form a super team sort of on a whim at first. They do it mostly for funsies. They all have these abilities and figure, well, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be superheroes. And then they end up getting sucked into an actual superhero mission of
Mhm.
sorts. And it builds from there as they try to make something of themselves and turn this into a serious deal. They somewhere along the line decide they want to be a serious superhero team, and that's a lot of what it's about. They're growing up and having completely normal lives, but then they have this entire bizarre streak where someone's trying to destroy something or kill them. So it's an interesting contrast. The main character and the one who really kind of helped cement this whole thing when I was trying to figure it out is Carrie Hauser. She's a 15-year-old girl. When I decided to write the story as first person perspective deal, which is what you kind of trendy in young adult, I admit, but it's also what works for me. She was the best character to be the perspective. Oh, we blinked out for a minute. We still good?
Still good. Yep.
All right. So she became the audience's guide in this series because she had the most interesting personality. She was the most personable and likable. She was one of the funniest, and I think they're all funny in their own way. But she became the best focal point for this entire thing. So it became a little less ensemble, a little more focus on her, but it's still ultimately about this core group. She has one of the few decent names on the team. She goes by Lightstorm. Her friend Matt, who really was the superhero geek who got this whole thing going in this series, goes by the name of Captain Trenchcoat, which is just sort of his little to the conventions of superhero naming. He possesses just backtracking a little. Carrie has somewhat Green Lantern-esque or Nova Corps style superhuman abilities. Matt has magical gloves that allow him to produce any sort of actual physical object when his hand is not visible to anyone. It's like when if a cartoon character goes, and look, here's a phone all of a sudden in my hand. That's what he does. And in the first book, he says, what sort of name am I really supposed to have? I have magic Mickey Mouse gloves.
Yes.
I'm just going to call myself Captain Trenchcoat because I wear a trench coat all the time, and it sticks. His friends just roll their eyes at him, but that's his little jab at the whole concept of superhero names. His best friend Stuart is a typical tank.
Yeah.
He goes by the name Super Beast for his love of old school heavy metal. White Zombie, Rob Zombie reference. Sarah is the team psionic, telepath, telekinetic. Goes by the name Psyche. And the final member of the team is Missy, who is a genetically engineered girl, which comes up later in the series. But she goes by the name Kunoichi, which is the Japanese term referring to a female ninja.
Okay.
Kind of her thing. So they're the core five. There are a lot of other supporting characters, most notably the local adult super team, the Protectorate, who, depending on which member you're talking about, have either a mentor-like relationship with the kids or hate the fact that they're going into this and expect them to get killed at any minute.
Yeah. There's always the fear of being murdered by somebody who doesn't want you around anymore. Oh goodness. So in the world that your series takes place in, is it based on our own like world? Or is it like a fictionalized version?
It's largely based in the real world. The town in which it takes place, Kingsport, it's a fictional town on the South Shore of Massachusetts, just north of Plymouth, down below Boston.
Mhm.
It's based not so loosely on my hometown, just because it gave me a nice sense of geography and texture, what a town like this would have for homes and businesses and neighborhoods. So it gives me a little bit of reality to ground it in. And it's like a lot of your standard superhero worlds where superheroes exist. They have for a while. People have a variety of opinions about them. They more or less function as an independent law enforcement arm in this
Mhm.
world, uh, and they're generally at worst tolerated, at best uh, applauded for what they do in the world. I've been As the series has gone along, I've fleshed out how superheroes fit into the worldview overall. Finally, figure going back a few decades to kind of chart the progression of superhumans in this world. Um, and like a lot of typical superhero worlds you find in the comics, it's a bit of a mishmash of genres within the overarching genre of superheroes. You've got supernatural elements, you've got heavy sci-fi elements,
Mhm.
which is one of the things that makes writing a more or less traditional superhero series fun, is because depending on the story you want to tell, you can do almost anything. You want to do gritty crime fiction, it's there. You want to do high-minded science fiction, it's there. You want to do lowbrow space opera, you can still do it. It all fits within this crazy quilt of a world.
Absolutely. It's like, what do you want? What do you want to try horror? There's
Mm-hmm.
people that have done it. I really like that part aspect of the genre as well because it I feel like sometimes it gets for for people who are new to reading like the novelization
Mm-hmm.
genre of superhero fiction, it's kind of like it's not one size fits all. It's like everybody's you can basically do whatever you want. It's like the framework there's a certain framework of expectation like any genre. But then after that, you can go with it and that's where your like originality and creativity show up.
And it's from a creative standpoint, it's fun knowing that you can go in seemingly starkly contrasting directions but still make it work. You have to have some sort of connective tissue so it all ultimately makes a kind of sense.
Mm-hmm.
um, but getting able to do, my riffs on Doctor Strange, John Constantine type characters in one book, and then getting to do Green Lantern Corps style deep space adventure in another. It's a blast, and I'm firmly of the belief that if the writer's having fun, then the audience is more likely to have fun. If the writer is just slogging through, it's going to show in the writing. So
Yes,
keeping things fun creatively is to everyone's benefit.
definitely. So do you have a special favorite type of power that you have used, or is it like they're all kind of like your children? Do you like the magical based ones, like the Green Lanterny type ones, or is there another one that is your one that you enjoy the most?
I kind of like Captain Trenchcoat's gloves, just because they're a little off the wall. Um,
Mhm.
the Captain Trenchcoat character originally began as sort of a riff between me and my friend Trisha, who does my cover art. We've been friends for 25 years now, and there was a time when we were nerding out about comics and favorite comic characters, and then we got going on some of the oddball characters we liked, and then we just started throwing out our own weird, goofy characters, and somehow Captain Trenchcoat came out in the same semi drunken riff as Disaster Man, the world's clumsiest superhero, and one of our favorites, which I reference as a joke in one of the books, William Whale Ass, the world's mightiest Scotsman. I felt much better about that entire thing when I read that Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon, I think it was, had a similar night at a pub. They were just throwing out the worst conceivable superheroes ever, and I think it was Steve Dillon who won with Dog Welder, who ended up in the Hitman series several years back as part of Section 8 or the Crazy 8 or Six Pack. I forget what the hell the name. It's been so long since I've read that series.
Yes. Oh man, that's like it circles back to the like there's usually some sort of like tongue-in-cheekness, even when it's like a super serious, like you gotta kind of like chuckle at the whole sort of like situation, because it's like some people that have powers or get cool artifacts don't necessarily want them. So it's like, oh geez, I'm gonna be stuck with this. I gotta come up with something. I'm not into it, but I'm gonna go with it. Oh goodness, I like that. So, but I guess my next question for you is kind of like you sort of answered it a little bit throughout,
Okay.
but um, what are some things that have inspired your superhero writing, and what kind of things do you like look for to like recharge your creative imagination?
Um, as I said, I grew up reading first and foremost Spider-Man. That was my gateway into comic books. And I read as a kid a lot of the classics of the time,
Mhm.
heavily Marvel, some DC. So I got a well-rounded education, so to speak. Um, and even though that was one of the first darker periods in comics, I feel like 60s and 70s was still largely an optimistic time in the industry. You had your serious stories. You had um, Green Lantern, Green Arrow addressing Speedy's drug addiction, and Spider-Man was addressing Harry Osborn's drug addiction. So they had
Mhm.
those serious moments, but they were still ultimately fun and generally positive stories. A lot of the heroes were doing what they were doing because it was the right thing to do. They maybe had some underlying tragic motivations like Bruce Wayne or Peter Parker,
Mhm.
but he also had characters who were just like, I can do this thing. I should do this thing. So I just like the whole concept of the superhero who's doing what he's doing because he can. It's the right thing to do. It's one of the reasons I love the Kamala Khan Ms. Marvel character. Is she's a normal girl who got superpowers and said, "Yeah, I'm going to be a superhero. I'm going to do good in the world. Why shouldn't I?" And I just like
Yes.
that not really naivete, but that innocent optimism that
Mhm.
gets tempered through time and experience, but that's the underlying motivation. In terms of writing that fuels me a little, one writer I really internalized for his approach to storytelling, uh, and God help me, I'm drawing a blank. Oh, brain cramp. It was Jeff Johns. I
Oh
found
yeah.
him when he took over The Flash,
Mhm.
uh, which I'd been following the title until then. He took over, and I guess he was originally only supposed to do a few fill-in issues, but they kept him on. And at first, I'm like, okay, this guy's kind of interesting. But the more it went on, the more I realized two of the things that he did that I absolutely loved. One is he had an ability to end every issue on, I couldn't even really say a cliffhanger per se, but he would end issues on notes that definitely left you wanting the next issue right now.
Mhm.
They were just. the the buttons were brilliant, and they made you want to keep reading the story. So I've employed that in my writing, not from book to book, but often from chapter to chapter, trying to leave chapters on a tantalizing note that makes the reader want to keep going. And based on how many emails I've received from readers telling me that I've deprived them of sleep because they like, I'll just read a couple chapters. Oh, damn it, I have to find out what happens next. So I
Yes.
seem to have taken that lesson to heart. And also, especially in his run in the Flash, his ability to make villain characters feel very three-dimensional, very textured, and very much like actual people. He'd give them these very rich backstories, and sometimes he'd throw in these little throwaway lines that alluded to something that this person liked in life, a TV show they enjoyed or music they enjoyed. And it was just these little bits of characterization that made the characters feel like real people. Because villains especially tend to become these rather two-dimensional characters. They become almost living plot points and fail to become actual characters themselves. So with action figures, especially when I get certain villain characters, I like to give them these little tastes of humanity that just make them feel more realistic. And it makes, I think it helps the audience, the readers connect with them a little bit. So even if they're villains that they're supposed to hate, there's still some level of humanity, so they recognize them as real people.
Definitely. I think that's been the big, like, not fully fleshed out part of most like popular superhero media lately has been just like they know the villain's going to only be in one movie or one season of TV and they'll be done. So it's kind of like, well, let's not waste time on letting us know who they are because they're going to be defeated by then. But it's like you said, like you, the ones that we remember and the ones that we love to hate are the ones that really have been like developed and like we know them and it's like we have that little bit of hope that maybe they'll come around and stop destroying cities or whatever. But
I've I've sat on a couple of panels at conventions in my neck of the woods, and I've gotten to sit on panels specifically speaking about villains. And the three villains I always bring up as great examples of villains along a bit of a spectrum from the Marvel cinematic and extended universes. I always point out Killmonger from Black Panther, Wilson Fisk from the first season, especially of Daredevil, and Kilgrave from the first season of Jessica Jones, because I think they hit three of the best character villain archetypes. Wilson Fisk is the villain who thinks he's the hero of his own story because you watch him in the first season, he loves New York. He wants to make it the best place he can. He's just going about in some really horrible ways. So there's this twisted nobility to him, which makes him very interesting. And plus, Vincent D'Onofrio's performance was absolutely astounding, and just made him. He made that character sometimes very sympathetic, and other times absolutely terrifying. It was marvelous, no pun intended. And then down in the middle of the scale, Killmonger, the character who his intentions aren't really all that noble when you look at them closely enough. They are in many ways selfish, and yet you still understand exactly where he comes from. You understand why he's doing what he's doing, and you almost want to root for him, but he's still such a horrible person. You can't quite. He's in a wonderfully complex villain. And then you get to Kilgrave and Jessica Jones, who he doesn't really have there's nothing sympathetic about him. He doesn't really have a lot of depth or texture, but what he is, first of all, is creepy as hell. David Tennant made him just skin crawlingly awful. My wife and I would watch the series, and we could only do one episode at a time because my wife would just be so disturbed by him. We'd like turn on Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt just to
Yes.
cleanse the palate a little. But he wasn't by any means a flat character because the Kilgrave embodied everything about the growing Me Too era at that time. He was toxic masculinity. He was male entitlement. Whenever he told a woman in the show to smile, and she did because she couldn't help herself, that was just it struck nerves. And that's why I put him up there with my top 3 Marvel villains, and I use them as examples a lot.
Mm-hmm. So for your own series, who I guess I didn't include this question really on the other episodes, but I guess maybe I should add it. But
Okay.
do you want to talk a little bit about your villains, or like?
Sure,
happily. I don't know how many there are, but I want to hear about them now that yeah.
There are a few recurring ones. I'm being very careful. The one trope I don't want to play into is the character who doesn't just seem to be dead, but actually is completely dead, and then somehow comes back later. I've done that with one character with a very specific purpose behind it. It was always part of the plan, and I had the reasoning hashed out. But this is going to be an exception. For the most part, if someone dies in the series, they are just dead.
They're gone. Dead is dead. Dead is final.
But the first villain I had, my first villain was Archimedes, who was an artificial intelligence who took over a human form, and he was kind of fun because he had points where he was still trying to figure out how to work the body, and got very upset with the idea that he went from being this artificial intelligence who could access the entire internet at will, and now he has to go through smartphones and computers, which are frustratingly slow and limited. He's been a recurring character throughout the series. In book 2, where I started to delve into the magical end of the world, I got to introduce Black Betty, a necromancer who has a history with Dr. Enigma, who's one of the heroes on the Protectorate, the adult superhero team. And I don't want to spoil too much. She had a larger purpose, so I've gotten to use her more than a few times. And someone who was making a comeback of sorts was from book 3, a girl by the name of Buzzkill Joy, who was Kunoichi's antithesis. They were both the result of the same genetic engineering product, but Buzzkill Joy was all of Kunoichi's abilities and none of her conscience. So she got to be the bloodthirsty lunatic. And she was fun to play with just because she knew she was an awful person, but she grooved on it. And it can be a lot of fun playing a character who knows they're bad, and they're bad just for the sake of it and don't care. That's their jam.
Yeah. It's something that I feel like is sort of like snobbishly looked down upon in the like villain motivations, but like we all know people at one point in our lives would they've just sort of been like, I just don't care. I'm gonna do whatever is easiest and whatever. And it's like same thing for like supervillains. I mean, they might have just gotten to the point where they're like, yep, I'm just gonna do this because they're just like Ms. Marvel. She's doing it because she's doing the right thing because she is compelled to do it. Sometimes the villains are just doing the wrong thing just because they feel compelled to do it.
It's a nice contrast because I know one of the most popular bits of advice that gets thrown out is the villain is the hero of their own story. And if you want that kind of villain, great. But there's a lot to be said for the bad guys who are just awful for the sake of being awful.
Absolutely. And it makes them kind of like wild cards where you're like, I don't know why you're doing it. I don't know what you're going to do next. Like,
It's one of the reasons why the Joker continues to be one of the most popular comic book villains ever is because it's just it's whatever the writers can have him do literally anything and it
mhm,
still kind of fits the character. I rather like Grant Morrison did a graphic novel years ago, Arkham Asylum.
mhm,
And I think it was in that there was this little almost throwaway bit about how the Joker is this, he's not insane, he's this super sanity who constantly reinvents himself, which is why there have been it almost it's like a wink and a nod acknowledgement to how back in the 50s the Joker was doing all these goofy crime schemes that didn't really hurt anyone per se and didn't really accomplish anything. They were just him off on a lark. Grant Morrison said he's got this higher form of sanity where he just reinvents himself constantly, which is why some days he's this playful clown who causes innocent mischief, and other days he's a mass murderer.
yeah. Ugh. They can never, they can never get rid of the Joker.
Oh God, no.
He can never truly be defeated. That's like a sign of like a great villain. Even when they kill him, they will bring him
Oh yeah.
back. uh, I guess my next question, you could answer it vaguely or not, depending on if it's
Okay.
spoilerific. Um, but do you have a favorite plot line that you have come up with for your series, or do you have a twist that you sort of discovered as you wrote that is one that you were thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe this has come to me?
I think the best answer I have is uh, as the series goes along, there's a point where the team has a bit of a crisis of faith and they kind of fall apart. The fifth book in the series, Team Ups, it's very different from the other books in that it's a series of connected short stories of the individual team members having these side adventures with people other than their teammates.
Mhm.
And the whole book is geared towards them finally finding their way back to each other as a team. And then I pull the rug out from under the readers, which caused a few angry emails to be sent my way, where I send Carrie off on a solo adventure out into outer space. In the series, she received her powers sort of in a Green Lantern-esque manner from an alien who fell to Earth. She finally meets the other members of this alien's team, the Vanguard, a intergalactic peacekeeping force, and she has to go off with them for this space adventure, and she leaves the rest of the team behind. Books 6 and 7 can be read technically in either order because one is all about what's going on with her friends back on Earth,
Mhm.
and the other is Carrie's adventure in space. And I think books 5, 6, and 7 make this nice little arc within an arc because 5 is very different because it's the series of stories told from every team member's perspective.
Mhm.
In book 6, Carrie's not around at all, so the entire book goes over to Sarah. And then in 7, it's nothing but Carrie. There's there are no other characters from the regular series to focus on. So I think together they make it's probably it's I think so far the high point of series in terms of the storytelling, the character development, and I'd say the emotional impact. My wife is one of my first beta readers,
Mhm.
and I know how well I'm doing by how much she's swearing at me. She got to a point in reading an early draft of book 7. She was in another room. She came storming in and just jammed her finger in my face and started swearing a blue streak at me. I'm like, oh, you got to that part.
Oh my gosh. So my question is, how long in between books, how long did you force readers to wait to, like, if a reader's favorite character was Carrie, how long did they have to wait to finally get back to her plot?
Generally, I release a book a year. I'm usually putting out the new books late winter, early spring, between February and April, depending on how things go.
Mhm.
So readers don't have to wait too long between books. I don't ever want to George R. R. Martin my fan base. Uh, if they were big fans of Carrie, they had a bit of a wait because there was a whole year where she wasn't around,
Mhm.
a year in real time, I
In
should
real
say.
life.
Um, and I'd like to think that it was worth the wait for when book 7 finally dropped, since it was heavily Carrie centric, and from there it's back to more or less the normal narrative where Carrie is the central character. So there was the one book where she just wasn't around, but I'd like to think that all the other characters were strong enough to keep the story going
Mhm.
without her, especially since Sarah's character underwent some pretty tough times in book 4, and she was in the process of rebuilding herself as a person. So there was a lot of meat for her to explore in 5 and 6. So
Mhm.
even though Carrie is one of the favorites among my readers, uh, people weren't too point out. It was a risk doing it that way because I stuck them with a cliffhanger at the end of book 5, took away the main character in book 6, and then gave them a space adventure unlike any other story in the series, and everyone stuck with me.
Yes.
So thank you, people. I
Nice.
appreciate it.
So is the series still ongoing?
Yeah, book. Got to remember the order. Book 9, which is Hell Hath No Fury, that came out earlier this year.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm currently. I've already finished the first draft of book 10, which is Unintended Consequences,
Okay.
which that's going to be an interesting one. It's a lot more character driven because I'm pulling out a lot of unresolved and seemingly resolved story threads from earlier in the series. It's basically a lot of the characters' pasts are coming back to bite them in a big way, and it's setting up for what may be one more book, but maybe two. In the parlance, I'm known as a pantser. I
Okay. I was
have
gonna ask, I was gonna say, do you plan ahead, or do you, like, it comes
I
to you as it comes to you?
I have a rough framework for the entire series and for each individual book, but I don't plan things out meticulously just because I like the spontaneity of, not to get too hippy dippy woo woo about it, but I like to let the characters take over the story a little because it helps drive the character the character arcs and sometimes the story arcs in some new and better ways than what I had planned out.
Mhm.
Um, Ideally, I'd like to do it as a core 12 book series with a 13th book coda. I have one sort of epilogue-ish story after the main storyline is done. But I have to really see where book 11 goes.
Mhm.
Um, because I have some setting up to do. It's just a question of, will I set enough up early on in book 11 that I can just proceed? Is it going to end with a quote unquote double issue,
Mhm.
or do I really need a full book to get all those pins lined up so I can really knock them down hard in the final book? And anyways, it is going to be a finite series. I don't believe in dragging a series out forever, because I'll lose interest in it. Readers will lose interest in it. And I think once the story I'm telling is told, there's no point in pushing it, because even though it is from a financial standpoint my most lucrative series, I don't want to just churn out garbage books for a quick buck.
Yeah. That's always the I mean my own series isn't very long yet and I have ideas for future books that I'm working on, but I always look at the really seriously long running novel series and I always wonder like how do you keep it going? Like eventually it's like so heavy that depending on how it's written, if it's like an overall story, how do you keep it going without it just collapsing on itself? Because eventually you turn into like the Wheel of Time where the readers are like, well, am I really good just reading an entire 500 page to 800 page book of them like having dinner? Or like, I don't know.
You
So I'm
mentioned
always
Wheel of
curious.
Time. You mentioned Wheel of Time, and I could swear I heard my wife upstairs screaming. She she loved the first couple books, but then it's like, and they're still outside the city.
Essentially.
Yeah. So yeah, I took a big cue from Neil Gaiman, who is my writing god.
Hmm.
Um, that the best stories have endings,
Hmm.
which I think what, even though he's revisited the Sandman a few times, that
Yeah.
he told this complete story, that it's like, oh wow, you can actually do this and not just keep pushing forward past the series lifespan. I think about how many comic book series, how many novel series, how many TV shows and movies would have been better if they had ended at a certain point. I will forever maintain that X Files should have done 5 seasons and stopped like it originally intended, and it would have been
Oh my
brilliant.
God. Yeah.
After that, it's just like, yep, okay. And I know I speak blasphemy to some degree, but Supernatural should have ended at 5 seasons.
Oh my gosh, Supernatural.
It's like I still enjoyed the characters, but I got to a point where I seriously like, how many times can Sam and Dean drive cross country without talking to each other about a really important plot point? I swear to God, if they just spoke to each other during these car rides, every season after 5 would have only been like 10 episodes. They would have solved the story like that. So I got really exhausted by that.
Yes. I think it's really from the writing, I mean, from the reader's perspective, so, like you want to always want more, but from the writer's perspective, it's like you say, where you really like it really there has to be a point where it's like this is the end. And like, yeah, you can I mean, never say never. There could be a spin-off in the future. Like not all spin-offs, everybody. And
Yeah.
I know I've been guilty of saying of criticizing spin-offs in media, but not all spin-offs are made out of making money. Sometimes like all we need as writers is a couple years off from
Yeah.
characters before they like work their way back in. But I know this is sort of a little tangent to like piggyback on what you said. I just listened. One of my favorite TV series was Lost,
Yep.
and I know a lot of friends who are like, it really should have ended like at a certain like it should have ended at the halfway mark and been done. And I just recently, I think it was Damon Lindelof. Um, he did like a candid interview where they basically asked him like, what was your plan for the series? Did you have an ending in mind? And he went into like amazing detail about how the writers of the show wanted to be done with the show because the overall mysteries and the plot just wouldn't support itself if it kept going. And like the money making businessy side kept butting in saying like, well, it's popular, it's a popular show, you got to keep going. And they were like, yeah, after a certain point we were like, it just won't keep going.
I will give Lindelof all the credit in the world for saying one season of Watchmen and done. And I
Exactly.
pray that HBO just lets it sit, because the series was, oh my God, that series was such a surprise, because I went into it heavily skeptical,
Oh,
because
absolutely.
it's Watchmen. It's one of the great iconic series of the late 20th century. And I thought, this is going to be a garbage fire beginning to end. I even saw the first trailers, and I'm like, eh. And the main reason I watched it is because my friend Alicia Rodis, who I met on the Renaissance Fair circuit, was the intimacy coordinator for the series. She
Oh,
was one of
okay.
the people who really spearheaded the whole intimacy coordination movement in show business, and got HBO to make that a standard position in all of their series. And I'm like, okay, well, Alicia's involved in this, so I gotta watch it. And
Mhm.
then the Tulsa massacre scene in the first episode had me sitting there with my jaw hanging open, and it just kept getting better, and somehow managed to be an extension of the original series without being a rehash, without retreading old territory, without tell a whole new story based on the mythology. And it blew me away, and I really don't want them to do a second season. They got lightning in a bottle with that baby. Leave
Yeah,
it be.
yeah. There's only so many times you can have something end well
Yeah.
before you're like, I mean, we've seen it in movies before where it's like, this one movie was so great and they order a second one and you're like, oh guys, they really used everything they had in that first installment. Like, I feel like
Not
this is one of
not
those things.
yeah. Not every sequel can be Aliens.
No, no, definitely not.
Most most sequels are Highlander to the Quickening.
Yes. Ugh.
Ugh.
Oh my gosh, I love it. It's like those ones where you're like, yep, this is
Oh,
definitely in the bargain bin. Four movies on one disc for a reason.
this one big name actor did it because he needed a house payment.
Yes. Luckily, in our cases, we're not, obligated by stuff like that. It's like we just have the page and we have our inspiration.
I mean,
Uh,
granted, I would love to eventually become a Hollywood sellout. I'm not that proud.
oh, of
Um,
course.
just if for no other reason, I would just like to get a, enough money that I can stop doing side gigs and really focus entirely on the writing. Um, don't know if it'll happen. It's a nice dream, but in the meantime, I mean, failing that, I just keep going with what I'm doing and try and find new projects to work on, because that's the other thing. I managed to squeak in an urban fantasy trilogy in between writing action figures, and I've gotten back to working on my fantasy series, and just having different projects to work on, I think helps keep me fresh on action figures, because it's not just, all right, well, I finished this book, I got to go right on to the next book. I have something that can shake things loose in my brain a little.
Yes, I feel like that is also important. There's a bunch of other authors that I've talked to who do the same sort of thing, and it does refresh. I feel bad for the big name authors that they're only known for one thing. And then when they don't do that one thing anymore, you're like, oh man, I love you for that one genre. You're right. But like from a writing perspective, like, yeah, it's sometimes that's why they all do it under pen names
Mm-hmm.
because they're like, I'm too well known, but I've got to write this. I write horror, but I've got to write this like cheesy romance just to get it out of my system.
I have to wonder what Jim Butcher is going to be producing once he finally wraps Dresden Files. I hear rumors that he's kind of wearing himself out on that, would like to go do some other stuff, but His baby, and everyone wants him to do more of that. But
Yeah. Oh boy. He's tried to end. I feel like he's run into the issue that some like big popular characters have run into, where it's like you try to end it, you say you're all done, and you start something new, and then it's like, but like you eventually can't ignore fans asking you for more. You just gotta like,
it's the Sherlock Holmes phenomenon.
it
You can kill
is.
him off, but the fans push you hard enough. You're like, fine, here's another story.
Yeah. It's like you sort of experience that with not having one of your lead characters in one book for 1 year. It's like, don't worry, they'll be back, I promise.
And I'm hoping that when Action Figures does finish, readers will follow me to other other projects. I'm having fun with my fantasy series. I'm actually working on that right now. I've got an idea for a standalone alternative history novel. I've got another YA series idea kicking in the back of my head. So there are other things I definitely want to do. And ending Action Figures is going to give me the time to do that, because as much as I write now, every project I have is another project I can't focus on. I can only divide my attention and dedicate my time in so many directions.
Mhm.
So Action Figures, when it ends, it will be sad, because it is the project that brought me to the dance, so to speak, and gave me an honest to God career as an author.
Mhm.
Um, but when it's time's come, I'm gonna try and let it go gracefully, and hope that the people who liked me for that will like me for the other stuff I'm writing.
Definitely. That leads me to my, I think this is one of my last real questions before I wrap
Okay.
it all up for
All
you.
right.
But can you tease, you sort of did this a little bit earlier, but is there anything you can tease your readers that they might, things they might expect in the next book in the series while they wait?
Well, without trying to do this without spoiling anything,
Mhm.
in Hell Hath No Fury, one of the major characters uh, comes to, I won't even say an unexpected fate. It's it's been building for a while now. I set up that particular set of pins much earlier in the series, and it finally comes to a head. And then in book 10, Unintended Consequences, a lot of other elements from earlier in the series sort of come back to haunt the characters. Throughout the series, there's been this one particular uh, recurring theme in book 4, which is one of the probably the darkest book in the series. The team confronted an individual known as the King of Pain, who was essentially a superhero serial killer, who would find these superheroes, screw with their heads, and basically drive them to suicide in the end. And then he targets the hero squad, the characters in Action Figures, and the way that ends has affected the characters throughout the rest of the series. They've been
Mhm.
dealing with this for almost every book since, in some way, shape, or form. There's been some sort of repercussion, and then the biggest repercussion that they've been dodging for several books finally comes back to bite them in the ass in book 10, on top of several other things. Um, it's it's going to be another game changer, and hopefully really set the stage for the last few books. And throughout the whole series, there's been an organization behind the scenes working on some sort of master plan that's finally going to come to fruition. And at last the hero squad, the protector, and all the good guys are going to finally come face to face with the person pulling the strings all along. So it's going to be a
Oh,
pretty big knockdown blowout finale. And it's not going to be the tidiest of endings. I don't think it can be.
mhm.
I do have several people who have threatened me with all sorts of mischief if certain characters don't make it through to the end of the series. Can't promise they're going to walk away happy, but I have to ultimately be honest to the characters and honest to the story I'm telling. And if someone doesn't make it out alive or at least intact,
Mhm.
then just forcing a happy ending, it doesn't do story or my readers a service. It's not respectful to them.
Mhm. Yes. So there you go, listeners. Uh, if your favorite characters are still here, enjoy them while they're here, and look forward
I,
to what happens next.
I
Cause
make no promises.
yeah, we got to keep you guessing somehow. So
It's going to be a case of don't give the readers the ending they say they want, give them the ending they don't know they want.
mhm, absolutely, those are usually the most satisfying endings, in my opinion, as a like media consumer, because
Mm-hmm.
they sort of give you a little bit, like they give you like a sort of flavor of something you expected, but then in the end, everything else just falls in, and that's like the surprise. It's not like out of left field, but
Yeah.
it's something that makes you go back and revisit over. Like my favorite things I go back and revisit over and over. I always discover something new that I'm like, oh my gosh, I never even picked up on that. Like,
And it's even better when you go back on these things and realize that yeah, this is the ending that the story is pushing towards all along, and it is the one that makes the most sense.
oh yeah, I love it. That's so cool. Like what a time to be a creator where there's really no barriers, and you can just like go for it, and like it's not just spiral notebooks in our drawers. It's like this is out there and people can actually like, I don't know, they can underline things and make their theories, and it's like it's just such a cool time.
And fortunately, the platforms are available that a lot of people like me who might have never broken into to traditional publishing can get those stories out. And there's a lot of good stuff out there among independent authors. The as much as people often rightfully crab about Amazon and its behind the scenes functions and its business practices, it as I heard it once put, it democratized publishing so that anyone could do it. The
Mhm.
downside is that yes, anyone can do it, and my God, some people probably shouldn't. But it's allowed a lot of great stories to get out in the world that otherwise never would have been seen.
Yeah, absolutely. So for listeners listening, uh, there is a look inside function. So you can't judge all indie pub so harshly. You have no excuse to not do your own research. And just because something is in the top 100 doesn't mean it's amazing. So, so there you have it. Well, I guess me personally, I can talk forever,
Yeah,
but I guess I'll give you the chance to um, let readers know where can they find your stuff, where can they find you online if you want to be found.
I think the easiest thing is for people to go to my website, which is innsmouthlook.com. INNSMOUTHLOOK.com. If you're a Lovecraft fan, you probably will get the reference. I do weekly blog posts updating my projects, what I'm working on, event announcements when we finally get to have events again.
Mhm.
And from there, they can find all my social media presences. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, sort of on Tumblr still. They can find my Amazon author page. They can sign up for my newsletter. They can choose to follow my blog or my Amazon author page to get updates. That's the best single place to find me. And while they're there, they can check out sample chapters from action figures and my other projects. One-stop shopping, so to speak.
Yes. So that is it for for my listeners. So want to thank Michael for being on the show with me. This was really a blast.
Well, thank you. It was fun. I like doing these things as much as I'm gonna. I'll listen to about 5 minutes of it and remind myself, all right, I don't like my voice, and then find something else to listen to.
You don't have to listen to yourself. Just force other people to listen to it.
Exactly. They'll take that bullet for me.
Yes. So I will wrap this up for you guys. Just want to remind all the listeners out there, if you like this podcast, whether you're listening to us on YouTube with video or if you're listening to us on iTunes or wherever else, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the future episodes. There's still a lot more to come. Give us a like, get notifications if you can, and comment down below if you're able to. I do ask if you talk about spoilers, just please give a little spoiler warning. So if you're like me and you scroll through YouTube comments to read discussions, that you just scroll by until you're done reading that particular book. But that's about it. So as always, just want to thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate you all, whether you're new or old to the podcast, and I will see you next time.